Welcome back, everybody. My name is Paul Conway, and I have the pleasure to serve as the Chair of Policy and Global Affairs for the American Association of Kidney Patients. I'm a 46-year kidney patient who's lived for 26 years on a kidney transplant, and I was diagnosed when I was 13 years old. The issue of payment and access for new innovations in kidney care is a primary issue for the American Association of Kidney Patients. Our organizing principle is patient care choice. And what that means to those who are watching and to the kidney patients across the United States and across the world is the right therapy at the right time so that patients can pursue their aspirations. That's how we define high quality healthcare. One of the greatest barriers that we talked about this morning was quality adjusted life years and their use in a discriminatory manner against patients who have chronic diseases and severe illnesses. Now, what we'd like to do is turn to a panel discussion about payment policies and how payment policies, when they're not aligned with the introduction of new innovations and safe therapies that are approved by FDA, can create serious problems, especially for kidney patients, because this is the decade of the kidney. This is a golden era of medicine for kidney patients, the likes of which we haven't seen in decades. And so what I'd like to do is go ahead and open up with a discussion on a legislative issue that's been brought forward by Congressman Adrian Smith. Congressman Smith has taken a strong look at issues of barrier to access in innovations, and he has a particular interest in the kidney patient population. He introduced a piece of legislation, which is very interesting to us, and our president, Ed Hickey, grabbed a hold of it early on when he saw this and decided that this was one of the key issues that kind of summarized much of what AAKP has fought for. And we are so pleased to have a champion in the House of Representatives who understands the need for safety at the same time that the kidney community and AAKP is pushing for greater home dialysis. We're also going to take a look at how the issue of payment affects other industries, and we'll be joined by one of our good allies on the therapeutics side. But first, let me go ahead and open up with our first guest, and that's Joe Corrales. And Joe serves as the legislative assistant to Representative Adrian Smith, who's the sponsor of the Home Dialysis Risk Prevention Act. And Joel, thank you so much for being on board with us this morning. And if you could kind of give us some background on the legislation and the Congressman's commitment to the kidney community, we'd appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad to be here today. Like I said, this is a really important topic when we're looking at access to care in different settings. And Congressman Smith has been really involved over the last couple of years in making sure that patients have different choices and different options when it comes to accessing necessary care. Seniors that need dialysis and are located a long way away from a dialysis center should have other options. And one of those is home dialysis. But as you know, home dialysis can bring along different risks and problems that you might not necessarily initially be aware of. And one of those is a problem called venous needle dislodgement. And that's where the needle that you're using for the hemodialysis procedure could potentially come loose or slip out of the place where it's inserted. And the dialysis machines don't necessarily know that there's a problem, and they'll keep extracting the blood and they'll keep trying to purify the blood, but it's not going back in to the patient. And in that kind of situation, it's really dangerous, and you can have horrible complications or even death happen very quickly. And so the congressman was looking at this problem and found out that there's some new technologies that have been brought to the market in recent years that allow for monitoring that can sound an alarm and help the patient to understand that there's a problem and then try and fix that problem before there's catastrophic consequences. But these technologies aren't currently covered by the Medicare home dialysis benefit. And so when that disconnect happens and there's technologies that can save the life of a patient, but they're not able to be paid for by Medicare, you're either having the patient spend hundreds of dollars on their own out of pocket, and you're talking about seniors often on limited incomes that might not be able to afford that. So what we're doing is we're looking at a bill here. We've introduced a bill here that makes sure that Medicare covers these devices. And we're looking at other opportunities to make sure that Medicare can continue to cover new innovative breakthrough devices that improve safety, improve access, and ultimately improve the quality of life for our seniors.
I appreciate it, Joel. And this is a fine example of an elected leader listening to the voices of their constituents, especially those who live in rural states, and trying to bring their concerns to the forefront through legislation and through active listening, which the congressman is engaged in across the kidney community, and we have deep respect for it. Our next guest is a longtime friend of AAKP. She's one of our ambassadors. Nieltje Gedney is the executive director of the Home Dialyzors United, HDU, which is an absolutely fantastic, strong organization here in Washington, D.C. and across the country. They believe in education and activation of patients and making certain that patients have their clear choice of home care. And, you were recently interviewed about this issue of venous needle dislodgement. And I think you have a particular insight on this, Nieltje, that other people, may not fully appreciate. But with your patient perspective and an organizational perspective, can you tell us exactly what the issue is?
So the first thing I'd like to say about the venous needle dislodgement, and actually thank you, Paul, for that wonderful introduction. And we love working with AAKP because, as we agree with you, that the patient voice is what counts. That being said, we with the venous needle dislodgement, it's a double-edged sword. We don't have any data that supports how serious this safety issue is in the home dialysis setting. So that's the number one thing that we've been working with CMS, CDC, and Congress on is getting the data established so that we actually know what the safety issues are. Given that there is the issue of venous needle dislodgement and the fact that there's a very simple solution is one that has constantly been profound to me, because it's not that expensive, and it is life-saving to have a sensor or a device that will detect when your venous needle dislodges. In my case, I did have one. I like to stress the fact that it was my negligence. I was one of those days where I didn't do that final step in taping, and so I take full responsibility for it. Fortunately, I was alert enough. I felt something off and looked down and saw that I had a pool of blood under my arm and immediately pushed the stop button. But and so it was, other than a bloodbath, it was tragedy was averted. I like to say that I like to make people aware that this is a problem, but not scare. I mean, I've been doing this for 10 years now. I listen to thousands and thousands of patients, and we have not had one patient in our group over the last 10 years, 6, 8, 10,000 members, who have ever had a situation that was life-threatening. We've all had a bloodbath, but none of them, thank goodness, have been life-threatening. So that's why I want to emphasize that we want to make sure that we're making people aware, but not scare them. That being said, having the technology available and not being able to use it is incredibly frustrating. And we've been on this issue for a good 4 or 5 years now, in making sure that as new technology is developed in the pipeline, whether it be a machine, a dialyzer like the Theranova, the RedSense detector, any of these new devices need to have a pathway to get to the patient. That has been one of our biggest frustrations. A lot of different safety and technology exists to make dialysis easier, especially in the home setting. We simply don't have access to it.
Well, I appreciate you bringing it up and shining a bright light on this, because one of the things is there's the data of what has happened. And then what we do know through AAKP and through your organization is that the national policy now since 2019 has been very clear of making certain that patients have their choices of home care, including home dialysis, that's hemo or PD. But especially on the hemodialysis side, there's a hesitancy at times that people have about, hey, safety. And the other factor to keep in mind is that the FDA has a new, safe, and approved home hemodialysis machine, which allows people to dialyze on their own with a much greater sense of independence and without having to burden caregivers. And so this issue of safety is an ongoing one as we try to expand the choices in the uptake of home dialysis. So you've heard about one particular issue in the field of a device that ensures patient safety, but this issue of payment and how it impacts access and the ongoing advancement of innovation is very important to some of our other industry partners that are in the arena of trying to bring better care to patients. And with this, what I'd like to do is ask Erin Mistry, who's here as the Chief Commercial Officer of CorMedix, to talk about their perspectives on some of these payment issues. And Erin, thank you very much. I know you're on travel, and appreciate you joining
No,
us.
that works. No, thank you so much, and happy to be here. As Paul mentioned, I'm Chief Commercial Officer. We're bringing a product to market. Should have FDA approval by the end of the year, so we're a couple months away, and we'll launch it in early 2024. And I'll get to the challenges here, but one of them is no matter what product comes to market, there must be clinical and financial alignment. And you can say that about a renal product, you can say it about an oncology product, but the mechanics of the healthcare system in this particular space prevent innovative therapies from coming to market, right? And that goes all the way back to investment that is made from venture capital and private equity into the space. They have to see an exit. They have to understand the financials at the end of the day, and the mechanics of the system in this particular disease area have prevented a lot of new therapies from coming to market. The biggest challenge is, for our particular product, we're speaking about hemodialysis patients that are on central venous catheters. And so if you're on a central venous catheter, one of your biggest concerns is infection. And so these incidence rates of a bloodstream infection, which is very severe, it's the catheters in your heart. If you have an infection, you likely go to the hospital for 3 or 4 a week or 2 weeks at a time, and develop a lot of long-term complications. So it's a very critical unmet medical need, and there's no approved FDA therapy for catheter lock solution currently. And that's very important because it's a first-in-class, it's a novel therapy. The FDA has, we've priority reviewed it. We have a qualified infectious disease product designation. And so there's a lot of great things. The clinical data reduces your infection by 71%. And so we have all of these amazing patient data components, but the challenge is, for a company like ours, is will the patients who can benefit the most from this therapy actually be able to receive it? Right? Medicare coverage affects the patients that have access to this therapy because of the unique payment situation that we're in, the bundled payment. But we are this is a new therapy, right? It's the right thing to do. It's the catheters are locked with, most of the time, heparin right now, and heparin came to market in the 1960s and early 70s. So if you're looking at, this is something that has to be done in every single dialysis session if you're on a central line, and we're locking it with products that were available 50, 60 years ago. And so that's a great example. And so what we're trying to do is utilize and leverage CMS to drive home the point that we need innovative therapies for the most unmet critical patient population that we have.
Thank you, Erin. Let me go over to a good ally of ours and a good friend, Kevin Bernier. Kevin serves as the Executive Director of U.S. Advocacy Relations for Bayer. And Kevin, what I want to ask you is, you've listened to this in the context of devices at this point, but on the therapeutic side, Bayer has been very pioneering in the efforts, and I know you personally have been incredibly committed to the idea of what do we have to do to slow progression of kidney diseases, and how do we prevent kidney failure far upstream from when people actually have to go on dialysis. And so as you listen to this discussion, those payment issues for your line of innovations and therapies, how important is that in terms of factoring in how you approach things with the advocacy community and also in terms of policy?
Great. Paul, thank you first for inviting me to participate in today's discussion. Everything you just teed up is front and centered in our minds. As Paul said, I work for Bayer, and our vision is health for all, hunger for none. Today, I'd like to share with you some of how we're working towards realizing that bold goal for people living with kidney disease. It's an incredible time to be working in kidney health. The recent acceleration of innovation has resulted in kidney treatment options that actually slow the progression of chronic kidney disease associated with type 2 diabetes and help protect people from cardiovascular related events. Not only are there new treatments, but there are viable options that benefit patients. this should be a hopeful time for the kidney community. Today, people can initiate treatment at an earlier stage and focus on optimizing their treatment to delay disease progression. But for many, trying to do so is wrought with red tape and frustration, with antiquated policies and unnecessary challenges that can block them from accessing these new treatments. As a result, the promise of prolonging either an organ transplant or dialysis is unattainable for some, despite decades of extensive research, including large clinical trials and objective, peer-reviewed clinical guidance for optimal management of chronic kidney disease. According to a recently published report by Ipsos, 56% of insured Americans say they're concerned a medicine their doctor prescribed won't be covered by their insurer. And 52% say they're concerned they'll have to wait for their insurer to give a prior authorization for a medicine that their doctor prescribed. A recent survey of patients by Cover My Meds found that in 2022, 2/3 of patients were delayed at least 24 hours when picking up their medications, and 1 in every 8 were delayed a week or longer. Patients reported negative effects from this, including 60% of them saying they experienced increased anxiety and stress, and 40% having a worsening of symptoms. In many cases, patients are asked to fail older therapies prior to being able to access newer, guideline-supported treatment options. Often, payers require patients to first try a medication that is not their physician's choice, resulting in missed work, greater out-of-pocket expenses, and a decrease in quality of life. These common practices interfere with the HCP-patient relationship and the treatment plan that they co-created. Added to this, physicians and their staff spend an exorbitant amount of time processing prior authorization forms and appealing rejected claims to insurance companies, time that should be allocated to patient care. According to a survey by the American Medical Association, 94% of physicians, I want to underscore, 94% of physicians report care delays while waiting for insurers to authorize necessary care. And 80% of physicians say prior authorization can lead to treatment abandonment. 1/3 of physicians report that prior authorization has led to a serious adverse event, including hospitalization, disability, or even death to a patient in their care. Often these burdens fall squarely on those who can least afford it, with key differences across racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic lines. These administrative hoops are especially difficult for those who have an hourly job or who don't speak English as their first language. And then, even if appropriate patients are approved to access medication, many have to pay exorbitant out-of-pocket costs. 19% of insured Americans report unaffordable out-of-pocket costs, as do 23% of Black Americans and 27% of Hispanic Americans. These out-of-pocket costs are especially troubling, given that minority populations in the U.S. shoulder a disproportionate burden of chronic kidney disease risk. Coverage decisions and cost sharing imposed by some Medicare plan sponsors only exacerbate these existing disparities, especially since Black Americans already have less access to healthcare than white Americans. It's an absolute disgrace that CKD mortality among Blacks is twice that of white patients. Kidney disease continues to progress. We must end this cycle together. Pharmaceutical companies are working to bring new, cost-effective options to patients and physicians, while also striving to ensure that evidence-based guidelines underscore access decisions. 93% of insured Americans agree that doctors, not insurers, should determine whether a medicine is clinically appropriate. While there is no cure for chronic kidney disease, short of a kidney transplant. New classes of therapies paired with advances in diagnosis and guidelines have ushered in a whole new era of CKD care, with the potential to slow the progression of kidney damage before it reaches end-stage renal disease. As I know you like to say, Paul, patient advocates get things done. We know that people who are engaged in their own advocacy tend to have better outcomes. One great way to do so is through AAKP's Patient Voice, Patient Choice initiative that you've heard multiple speakers speak of today. Your voice matters. Thanks again for the opportunity to be here, and thank you to all the advocates who work tirelessly alongside us and healthcare providers to benefit patients. Back to
Kevin,
you, Paul.
I appreciate you being here, Kevin, and because innovation in both therapies and in devices is critical. And you're correct. This is a golden era for the kidney community. I want to go back over to Joel and ask Joel this. A lot of the work that the advocacy community does in the kidney space involves visits to Capitol Hill, visits to local congressional offices. And what I think is unique about Congressman Smith is this. He serves in multiple different capacities on some very influential committees. One of the things that our president, Ed Hickey, is the chair of is the Veterans Health Initiative. We work very closely with veterans across the country. Ed is a Marine Corps veteran. When you take a look at advocates that come in to engage with your office and with the congressman, what are the types of things that you listen for that make an impact that actually lead in the decision process to somebody like Congressman Smith taking charge and driving legislation to help patients? I'm interested in how that takes place in your office.
Well, like you said, one of the most important things that members of Congress and staff that work for members do is to engage with constituents and advocates that come into our office. We hear from people all the time from all different walks of life, and a lot of them are coming here to try and have us engage with them and find a way to help them with the challenges that they're experiencing. Congressman Smith is on the Ways and Means Committee and is on the Health Subcommittee there for Ways and Means, which has exclusive jurisdiction over some of the major parts of Medicare. And that's why we're involved in this space. But when we have constituents that come in, we want to hear exactly what the problem is, where the barriers are, and how congressional action can help improve your life, improve your family and your kids and all of your relationships there. And then most importantly, how that's going to help your community and everything kind of come together and benefit the whole region or the area where you're working. So when we're talking about home dialysis, one of the things that's most important here is that the access point there in the home is not just about the patient, it's about the patient's caregivers, it's about the patient's ability to potentially still stay in the workforce after they've been diagnosed with this kind of a condition. It's about them to have a better quality of life, and that has spillover effects that benefits all kinds of different people and has what I would consider to be an exponential impact. So having those choices, having those options to receive care where it's best for our seniors, we want to hear about how that's impacting you and your life and your community. And then, we want to look and see how we can invest in those options and use the tools that we have here in Congress to make that change in payment policy or make that change in access to be able to realize that improvement.
Thank you very much, Joel. Let me go over to Erin and ask you this, Erin, from an industry perspective. The benefits of working closely with advocacy organizations, not simply on the call to action side in Congress, but what are some of the insights you get in the partnership in understanding the patient burdens that drive you as a professional to want to make certain that these things new products get into the hands of patients?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, we're designated as a drug. So it is therapeutic from that perspective. And we do both, we work both on the Hill and with advocacy organizations. And for us, it's making sure that patient safety and the infection prevention are higher policy priorities so that we can work with patients on grassroots advocacy efforts, right? Patient stories, patient videos that we can bring to policymakers on the Hill and frankly the agency itself, right? And that makes it more humanistic. Anytime that you can make things more humanistic, individual patient stories that are impactful, that drives home any point around bringing innovative products to the market. For us in particular, I think that policy prevention and the prevention here, for our particular therapeutic, is we want patients to go home and have home dialysis. We want patients to stay on a transplant list. If you get a bloodstream infection, you can't do that. Fistulas don't mature as quickly. You remove yourself off a transplant list. So there's profound impacts that happen with one of these infections. And what we're asking for is a preventative therapy that actually never systemically goes into the body, but it's safety. And so those types of things are very, very important to us to drive home the point and make that the grassroots advocacy very front and center, right? We know nothing gets done without the patient being front and center. And frankly, it's the right thing to do. Many quality lives, or many patient lives are saved here. And I think when you look at advocacy, one of the pieces that we try to tie together is how do we make this important to those policymakers? How many patients are in those particular states of the policymakers? How many dialysis clinics are there? How does that impact them? Right? And how do we bring that forward and tie that data together? And frankly, it's all about data. I mean, 1 in 5 Medicare dollars are spent in the renal population, and therefore, and for myself, I've launched therapeutics in other areas, right? And what it appears, and I hate to say it like this, but what it looks like is you see cell and gene therapies coming to market for different patient populations. You see tons and tons of oncology products and mRNA and all of these types of things, right? And yet there's payment mechanisms for them, right? They're shrinking, and as an industry as a whole, I think they're shrinking, but there are mechanisms to bring innovative products to the market. In the renal space, it's very, very limited. And so what that says to patients is your life is not as important as someone else's life. And I think to drive that point home, you have to be able to bring new products in, new dialysis machines, keep people home, keep people comfortable, improve their quality of life. And that comes through clinical and financial alignment. Clinical, it has to be there, but the financials have to be there also. Otherwise, you'll never get the products coming to market. But I do go back to, and maybe this isn't the right form to say that, but it's relatively true. Whose life? Why are we saying that someone else's life could be more important than others? Because they're getting these new products, and I think sometimes you just bluntly have to say it like that, right?
I tell you what, Erin, if there's one thing that AAKP is not afraid of and is well associated with, is straight talk. So
yeah, good.
We appreciate the candor, and we have no fear. Trust me. Let me go over to Kevin. And Kevin, there are a couple of issues that have come up here, and Joel kind of hit it on the head, and all of our speakers have. But what I'm interested in is when you engage as the head of advocacy for Bayer in the U.S., when you engage with advocates, you're listening to something that's beyond simply a product. And I know that over the years, you pay very close attention to our work in trying to make certain that the entire person is understood. And so this idea of keeping people employed and making certain that they have the option to do part-time and full-time work, even though they have a chronic disease. Can you tell us how you learn from advocates about the importance of that and how you take that back into the work that you do at Bayer?
Sure. Thanks for that question, Paul. First and foremost, I come from the perspective of being a human being. And my assumption that I want to be a productive member of society with a quality of life that I would desire to have over time is what all of us want and all of us deserve. And when I think of that in terms of kidney disease, I think about how do we look to the standards of care and the knowledgeable scientists who have put together treatment guidelines objectively in as to what the standard should be and what every patient deserves to have access to. That's the ultimate point that I hear time and time again resonate with patients. Everybody wants the best that they possibly can get. CKD is a progressive disease. We know that. We know the number of folks who are being diagnosed is increasing, but we also know the number of folks who are unaware they have CKD is also incredibly large. And so when I talk to folks who tell their story, who just after the fact realize they didn't know that there were options that they could choose along with their physicians to prevent them from progressing in their kidney disease, they get angry. And it's that anger that every patient should not have to feel. They should have access to the best, most current innovative therapies to keep themselves as healthy as possible so they can be productive members of society, continue to work in the full capacity that they so desire.
Thanks, Kevin. I think that's something that sometimes when folks are looking at a patient population that has chronic disease and that has serious issues like, kidney failure and living on dialysis or waiting for a transplant, they forget the other dimensions of life that we live. I've lived with kidney disease for 46 years and on a transplant for 26. And sometimes, it's no negative aspersion that's cast, but people only view you through one lens, and that is of a patient. And there's just so much more to it. And Nieltje, let me go over to you and ask you this. At Home Dialyzors United, you folks have done such great work in raising the voices of patients who choose to do home dialysis and educating them on that. When you hear from Joel and the work he's doing for Congressman Smith, and when you hear from Erin and when you hear from Kevin about how valuable patient insights are, what does that say to you as the head of an advocacy organization about the importance of the work that you're doing every day to organize and lift patients up?
So I am really excited that the status quo, thanks to all of our efforts, has been changing very rapidly in my opinion, in the last year or so, in terms of patient advocacy. When I first started in this realm in 2014, the patients were not represented in any of the national organizations. You didn't see them working with research and development, new product development. And I remember my first ASN meeting, and we were the only patients there in 2015. From that time, we now see where all of these organizations are incorporating the patient voice into all of their platforms. And even more importantly, in all of the new research and development companies are bringing patient boards, just like Bayer, CorMedix. We just recently worked with Aleo. They just got their funding for FDA. Their approval through FDA, not their funding. But that is so important to us because, A, we want to see these products, but we also want to see them with the impact. We don't want to see a product get to market and then have the patients go, but this isn't going to work for us. So it's critical that we're working with patients are working with these companies and manufacturers and research and development early in the game so that they can get the impact of the patient voice early on and not make these costly mistakes. And that's where I know that AAKP has been doing this for years, and we've been doing it with a number of different dialysis related products. Mostly, again, we focus on what benefits the home community. That's our mission. But and we're really proud of the fact that we've implemented change. We've brought products to market that through patient campaigns, grassroots campaigns. We did Tepney's, I can't remember, 2 or 3 years ago. We got the care partner requirement removed from the FDA. There's a lot of campaigns that can be effective. And I think the biggest thing that I find is really hard is the fear that patients have of advocating for themselves. And I hate to say that this exists. And this is the one thing that we're working with through media, webinars, education, is to let them know that they can't, that your voice is so important. You have to, if you want to make that change happen, you've got to use that voice. And if you don't use that voice, the things that do happen to you, you don't have control over. So we don't have an alternative. We have to use our voice. This is something I learned. I was 16 when I had my first job on Capitol Hill, and I've never forgotten it. We got the voting age lowered to 18 because I'm dating myself, that was back in Vietnam. And it taught me that there is power in numbers, and we just have to work together, all of us. That's the critical thing. The more numbers we have, the more voices we have, the more we can impact change. And that's the end of my soapbox for today.
Well, I tell you what, it's a big soapbox, and you have a lot of good friends standing on it right with you, Nieltje, and I appreciate it. Joel, let me ask you something from the standpoint of inside a congressional office. What does it do for the work of the congressman when you know that a new technology and an innovation is moving forward into the marketplace, and it has the backing of a large, broad-based coalition of patients, industry, and medical professionals? When you take a look at that, what does that signal to the congressman in terms of the path forward and the confidence he has that recommending policy has a base to it?
Well, definitely the more people and the more different kind of players that you have involved that are backing a device or backing a drug or backing a new technology, the more weight we're going to be able to have as we try to move the legislative process forward. Congress is not necessarily known for being the most quick and effective when it comes to legislation. And so we really need all the help that we can get when we're talking about trying to make a change to law, to statute, that will improve access and improve the lives of our constituents and Medicare beneficiaries in particular. But the more support we have and the broader that base of support is, when we're talking about constituents and patients, but also researchers, analysts, the companies themselves advocating for why this is something that they've invested time and effort into for the sake of their patients. If we have a broad coalition, then that's easier to make the case that something needs to be done and needs to be done quickly. And so whenever we're talking about these policy changes, we have to try and convince the other members here in the House and also in the Senate, working with the committee leadership as well, to make sure that they understand why these issues are important and need legislative action. And really, every additional piece of support, every additional constituent, every additional stakeholder that weighs in helps to build that importance, to build that justification for why we need to take this action.
I appreciate your candor, Joel, because I think it's one of the things sometimes maybe not everybody fully understands the operations inside a congressional office and the support that an elected leader needs to move forward with confidence in engaging committee leadership and counterparts across on the Senate side and doing it in a bipartisan manner, especially when you have a broad base. What I'd like to do is thank all of our guests for shining a light on how important payment is, not only on the device side, but also on the therapeutic side. This is an extremely important issue to the move forward of innovation and access for patients. Can't emphasize it enough. You will see on this platform that you have buttons to take action. Again, we'd like to salute Congressman Adrian Smith for being an absolute champion on Ways and Means, for bringing issues of safety and patient access and understanding the fundamental need of patients to maintain employment and to stay healthy. We'd like to thank each of our guests for understanding that patients are bigger than simply their diagnosis. And that is why we use our events like the Policy Summit to elevate partners and people who understand that there is far more at stake at innovation in payment issues than simply the approval to pay one device or one drug. It's about the person and what they need to keep progressing. So again, we're about to take a short break. Take a look at the links that you have there to educate yourself and to take action. And definitely take a look at Congressman Adrian Smith legislation. AAKP is backing it. We think it's a great example of an elected leader taking proactive action after listening to the voices of patients, not only in his state of Nebraska, but around the country.